Now it's time to talk about some of the recent models of context which are being used in multiple ways in the critical discourse analysis studies. I'll just begin with conversation analysis approach. Conversation analysis approach uh, emphasizes upon the fact that context is construed through the moves in a conversation. So it is a continuous process and which is keep building on as the conversation moves on. But in other words, it is constructed moment by moment as the conversation progresses. So it's not static, it's not fixed, or it's not to a large extent pre-designed. Rather, it is developed as the conversation progresses. But even in this regard, we have two different views. One is the strong view, and other is a weak view. The strong view comes from some researchers, says that evidence of context should be available in the moves of a conversation, or should be located in the sequence of a conversation, and it should not come from the outside. Whereas the weaker view argues that going outside the immediate interactional context to the institutional context or broader sociocultural context would help us to reach the deeper meaning of a conversation. Anyhow, the strong traditional conversational analyst would argue more about the strong view, which focuses more on understanding the sequence of a conversation. CA allows critical discourse analysis to develop a fine-grained analysis of a text by using not only the immediate sequence of thoughts of the speakers or participants in a conversation, but also utilizing certain immediate contextual factors also. Therefore, it helps us to understand naturally occurring data in real life context. Then also, given the critique that the stronger view of this conversational analysis does not allow us to reach the outer context, the social context, we can say that this conversation analysis can be combined with other social methodologies which are based on broader social context in order to overcome this criticism. Another approach is systematic functional linguistics, which has been popular for some decades now, and this is based on three-dimensional model of context. First feature of this 3D model is field of discourse, which involves the subject matter or the content of the text which is being investigated. Then we have tenor of discourse, which involves the relationship between the speakers or the participants and their attitudes. Then mode of discourse, what is the channel through which that discourse has been communicated. This may involve speech or writing, and also rhetorical role of the discourse. This may be didactic, may be persuasive or aggressive. These three dimensions, when worked together, help us to understand and construct various varieties of language, for example, registers, and they help us to understand the meanings of these varieties. Systematic functional linguistics also help us to relate form with the function. So this is unique in this way that it helps us to focus on this aspect of analysis, where we could not only analyze form and functions, but we can relate them in order, as I said earlier, in order to reach deeper meanings of a text. Then ethnographic approaches, which comes largely from American anthropologists, especially Himes, they see the social context and not the immediate linguistic context, rather the social context as the main central aspect of communication, and therefore they see context as something text external, social and other cultural factors. Cognitive linguistics also acknowledges the importance of context recently, but they look into context from a mental or cognitive perspective, and they see cognitive systems of interacting groups or and their members as the constituents of a context. So for them, the context is a kind of mental model which resides in the minds of the people who interact or participate in a certain discourse. Then we can track the patterns of such mental models or discourse by looking into the language use of various participants in a discourse. And then we can also study the conceptual metaphor and which can reveal the ideological functions of a discourse. This conceptual metaphor is very popular in the studies in the field of these cognitive linguistics, and this can be helpful in understanding the deeper mental context. Similarly, grammatical patterning can also be used in order to understand the mental models. And moreover, we can see that overall this kind of context includes an interface between discourse and society, and which can lead to an analysis of the interpretation stage of discourse as far as the contemporary critical discourse analysis is concerned. Then in corpus linguistics, we also have a context element which involves text and context interface, and this helps us to understand language in a specific corpus of text and a reference corpus to show how language use in specific context varies from one context to another. So in corpus linguistics, we collect the chunks of various texts occurring simultaneously, and we see why do they occur together. Usually the researchers look into collocations, look into various qualitative and quantitative factors, linguistic factors, and try to reach out that what kind of meaning can be associated with those collocations or expressions used in particular situations. But understanding of those corpus can be made only when we place them in a certain context. It's not possible to understand a corpus without a broader context, though this context may be pre-decided. For example, you might look at the representation of Muslim women in some European newspapers, so you will fix your eye on that particular representation in advance. So therefore this reduces the overall scope of context somehow, that's why some people criticize this approach for decontextualizing the data and for limiting the analysis to a bottom-up approach only. But still, this can be valuable in some spheres of linguistic understanding. Multimodal discourse, which is recent as compared to others, focuses on looking at text from multiple perspectives. It doesn't reduce text to the words only. Rather, all other models which are available, which may be pictures, which may be body gestures, other symbols and signs, they involve all semiotic systems to reach a meaning. So they all these semiotic systems constitute the context of a discourse. Maybe the other semiotic features become context for the verbal or for the word element of a discourse. This approach is influenced by the work of Halliday, and this was pioneered by Kress and Levin somewhere in late 90s. This multimodal discourse analysis approach focuses specifically on how different semiotic resources are deployed in the recontextualization of a context, and this might help us in understanding a particular discourse, because certain features which may not be verbal are used to create, recreate, or sometimes to change or emphasize upon, frame a certain context. This is similar to the choice of colors in a certain advertisement or to the choice of backdrop in a certain stage drama. This all matters, and one of the interesting examples of a multimodal discourse analysis can be seen in the study, in various studies on televised and online news, which construe discourse context and culture simultaneously. So what we see in form of online or televised news, that is a combination of culture and context along with information. So this approach can also be very useful in the contemporary critical discourse analysis.